How do you stay a rock star for over 60 years? These music legends know the secret, and some are pushing 90 years old. One of them became famous for lighting himself on fire on stage every single night, and his story is one of the wildest in music history. 1. Bill Wyman. Kicking off our list is the one and only Bill Wyman, the legendary original bass player for the Rolling Stones. As of 2025, Bill is an incredible 89 years old, making him the elder statesman of heavy rock pioneers. For 30 years, he was the cool, calm, and collected anchor of the Stones' rhythm section. While other members of the band were famous for their wild energy, Bill was known for his steady presence and unique way of holding his bass vertically. He was the quiet storm at the center of the hurricane. But do not let his quiet demeanor fool you. Bill's bass lines were the secret weapon that gave the Stones their signature gritty, bluesy swagger. On classic albums like Let It Bleed and Sticky Fingers, his playing was deep, groovy, and powerful. He and drummer Charlie Watts created a rock-solid foundation that allowed the guitars to slash and burn on top. This powerful low-end rumble was a key ingredient in pushing rock music into harder territory. Without that tough, blues-infused rhythm, many of the early metal bands might have sounded very different. Bill Wyman proved that you do not have to be the loudest person on stage to be the heaviest. Bill held down the fort for the world's greatest rock and roll band. Our next legend, however, was the flashy frontman for a group that bridged the gap between hard rock and the glam movement that would soon take over the world. 2. Ian Hunter. Next on our list is the iconic Ian Hunter, the legendary frontman for the band Mott the Hoople. As of 2025, Ian is a mighty 86 years old, and he remains one of the most respected and coolest rockers on the planet. His band, Mott the Hoople, was a massive influence in the early 1970s. They were a perfect link between the tough hard rock of the late 60s and the flashy theatrical glam rock style that was about to explode. They had a rebellious rock and roll attitude, but also wore sunglasses and outrageous outfits, a look that countless bands would copy for decades to come. You probably know their most famous song, All the Young Dudes. What you might not know is that the song was actually a gift from another music legend, David Bowie. Truth be told, the band was struggling and on the verge of breaking up. Bowie, who was a huge fan, offered them this incredible anthem to help save their career, and it became a worldwide smash hit. Ian Hunter's raspy voice, clever lyrics, and effortlessly cool personality made him a hero to a whole generation of rock fans. He is a true original who helped write the instruction manual on how to be a rock star. He is living proof that a true rock and roll spirit is timeless. But while Ian was bringing glam rock to the stage, our next pioneer was taking rock to the stars, creating a cosmic sound that was heavier than a black hole. 3. Dave Brock. Prepare for liftoff, because our next pioneer is Dave Brock, the founder, guitarist, and visionary leader of the legendary space rock band Hawkwind. At 84 years old, Dave is the captain of a musical spaceship that has been exploring the outer limits of heavy music for over 50 years. Hawkwind's sound was a swirling, psychedelic mix of hard-driving, repetitive guitar riffs, bubbling synthesizers, and science fiction themes. They called it a sonic attack, and it was designed to be an overwhelming, immersive experience. Hawkwind is one of the most important links between psychedelia and heavy metal. Their long, sprawling songs and heavy, hypnotic riffs directly inspired the stoner metal and doom metal genres. And here is a piece of trivia for you. For a few years in the early 70s, Hawkwind's bass player was a man named Lemmy Kilmister. After leaving the band, Lemmy would go on to form Motorhead, one of the most beloved heavy metal bands of all time, taking Hawkwind's speed and intensity with him. Dave Brock has always been the steady hand at the controls, a true innovator who proved that heavy music could take you on a journey through your own mind. Dave Brock took his fans on a trip through space. Our next legend, however, was more interested in taking his audience on a trip to the underworld with a shocking stage show that was literally on fire. 4. Arthur Brown. Prepare to meet the god of hellfire himself, the one and only Arthur Brown. At 83 years old, Arthur Brown is one of the true originals of theatrical rock music. He is the man who directly inspired artists like Alice Cooper, Kiss, and Peter Gabriel with his incredibly wild and unforgettable stage performances. Back in 1968, he had a massive hit song simply called Fire. And when he performed it, he was not kidding around. He would come out on stage wearing a metal helmet that was set on fire. It was a shocking, dangerous, and brilliant stunt that nobody had ever seen before. His band was called The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, and the name fit them perfectly. Their music was a spooky, organ-driven kind of psychedelic rock that created a dark and dramatic atmosphere. Arthur's powerful operatic voice would soar over the music as he told strange, mystical stories. He was the original shock rocker. He proved that a rock concert could be more than just a band playing its songs. It could be a piece of theater, a spectacle designed to thrill, mesmerize, and maybe even scare the audience a little bit. Without Arthur Brown and his flaming helmet, the whole look and feel of heavy metal might be very different today. Arthur Brown played with fire and became a legend. Our next artist also became a legend, not with fire, but with his iconic voice, swagger, and his role as the ultimate rock and roll frontman. 5. Mick Jagger. You can't always get what you want, but with our next entry, you get a true rock and roll icon. He is the electrifying frontman of the Rolling Stones, Mr. Mick Jagger. At 82 years old, Mick is still the definition of a rock star. For over 60 years, his energetic performances, unique voice, and rebellious attitude have set the standard for what a lead singer should be. He struts, he preens, he commands the stage with a charisma that is simply off the charts. While the Rolling Stones started as a blues band, they quickly evolved, adding a harder, more aggressive edge to their music that was hugely influential. Songs like Sympathy for the Devil and Gimme Shelter have a dark, menacing energy that tapped into the heavier side of rock. Mick's genius was in creating a persona that was both dangerous and impossibly cool. This theatrical, larger-than-life style provided a blueprint for generations of heavy metal frontmen, from Robert Plant to Axl Rose. He showed that a singer's job was not just to sing the notes, but to sell the song with every fiber of their being. Mick Jagger defined what it means to be a frontman. Our next legend was the quiet engine in a band full of guitar gods, providing the steady beat that launched 1,000 heavy riffs. 6. Jim McCarty. Let's talk about a band that was like a superhero academy for guitar players, the Yardbirds. And keeping the beat for that legendary group was the amazing drummer Jim McCarty, who is a strong 82 years old in 2025. The Yardbirds are famous because they had 3 of the most legendary guitarists of all time pass through their ranks one after another: Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page. That is an unbelievable amount of talent for just one band. Their music was rooted in the blues, but they were always pushing forward, experimenting with feedback, distortion, and new song structures. Jim McCarty was the steady anchor in the middle of all that guitar genius. His drumming was energetic, inventive, and jazzy, providing the perfect foundation for the band's wild musical explorations. The Yardbirds were one of the first bands to really use feedback not as a mistake, but as a part of the music itself. They had a groundbreaking song called Shapes of Things, which had a heavy, driving beat, a futuristic, mind-bending guitar solo, and lyrics about saving the world. It was a key step on the road to heavy metal, and Jim was there, driving the band forward from behind his drum kit. Jim McCarty was the backbone for a band of guitar gods. One of his bandmates from a different, even earlier group was also creating a raw sound that shook up the music scene. And he is up next. 7. Dick Taylor. Before the Rolling Stones were the global phenomenon we know today, they had a different bass player, a man named Dick Taylor. Dick, who is also 82 years old, made a fateful decision to leave that band to start his own group. The band he formed, The Pretty Things, became one of the rawest, wildest, and most underrated rock and roll bands of the entire 1960s. While many other bands were trying to be clean-cut pop stars, The Pretty Things were loud, aggressive, and gloriously messy. They were the undisputed bad boys of the London music scene. The Pretty Things played a super-fast, high-energy version of rhythm and blues that would later be a huge inspiration for garage rock and the first wave of punk bands. But their influence did not stop there. In 1968, they released an ambitious album called SF Sorrow, which is considered by many to be the very first rock opera ever created, even beating The Who's Tommy to the punch. The album told a single dark story from beginning to end and featured some truly heavy psychedelic guitar work. Dick Taylor and his band were true innovators who were never afraid to be loud and different. Dick Taylor chose his own path and created a beautifully raw noise. That spirit of innovation was shared by our next legend, who took the blues and turned it into something massive, powerful, and world-conquering. 8. Jimmy Page. Now we arrive at a true giant of rock music, the architect of the ultimate heavy rock band, Jimmy Page. At 81 years old, Jimmy Page is the guitarist and mastermind behind the legendary Led Zeppelin. Before he formed Zeppelin, Jimmy was one of the most sought-after session guitarists in all of London. This means he played guitar, often uncredited, on hit records for countless other famous bands and artists, including The Who and the Kinks. This incredible experience taught him everything he needed to know about sound and record production. When he finally formed Led Zeppelin, he put all that knowledge to work. He had a vision to create a band that could be as gentle and acoustic as a folk song one minute and as heavy as a thunderstorm the next. He succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. His iconic guitar riffs from songs like Whole Lotta Love, Black Dog, and Kashmir are some of the most famous and most copied in all of rock history. He produced all of Zeppelin's albums, carefully crafting a sound that was massive, powerful, and full of mystery and magic. There is no question that without Jimmy Page, the very sound of heavy metal would be completely different. Jimmy Page built the cathedral of heavy rock, but every great band needs a great voice, and our next legend has one of the most powerful and recognizable screams in music history. Roger Daltrey. Who are you? You are about to meet the powerhouse vocalist of The Who, the one and only Roger Daltrey. At 81 years old, Roger is still the tough, charismatic frontman who has been thrilling audiences for decades with his incredible stage presence. The Who was another one of those bands that changed everything. They played louder, harder, and with more raw energy than almost anyone else. They were famous for their wild, destructive stage shows, where they would often smash their instruments to pieces at the end of the night in a final, explosive burst of sound. Roger Daltrey's voice was the perfect weapon for this kind of musical assault. He could sing with soul and sensitivity on one line, then let out a primal scream on the next that could shake an entire stadium. His famous stuttering vocal on the classic song My Generation became an anthem for rebellious youth everywhere. He was the classic rock god frontman, with his long flowing hair and a microphone he would swing around his head like a dangerous lasso. He set the standard for what a heavy rock singer should be: powerful, confident, and bursting with raw energy. Roger Daltrey's scream became the voice of a generation. Up next is the man who literally put the words heavy metal into a rock song for the very first time. 10. John Kay. Get your motor running and head out on the highway with our next rock legend, John Kay. The iconic leader of the band Steppenwolf is 81 years old, and he holds a very special place in the history of heavy music. He is the man whose song gave the entire genre its name. In 1968, Steppenwolf released their legendary anthem, Born to Be Wild. In the second verse of that song, there is a line that says, I like smoke and lightning, heavy metal thunder. At the time, Nobody had ever used the phrase heavy metal to describe a style of music before. That one single line, penned by the songwriter who created the track, perfectly captured the sound and feeling of this new, heavier style of rock and roll. It was a lucky accident that gave a name to a whole musical movement that was just beginning to bubble up from the underground. But Steppenwolf was much more than just one line in one song. They played a tough, gritty, bluesy kind of rock with a biker edge that was raw and powerful. John Kay's gravelly voice and his cool, mysterious persona, often hidden behind dark sunglasses, made him the perfect leader for a band that sounded like a roaring motorcycle engine. John Kay gave heavy metal its name. Our next guitarist, however, gave it one of its signature sounds, a sound so thick and fuzzy it felt like it could knock you right over. 11. Lee Stevens. Let's travel back to San Francisco in the late 1960s, a time of peace and love. But one band, Blue Cheer, was not interested in flowers and peaceful vibes. They were interested in being the absolute loudest band in the entire world. And their guitarist, Lee Stevens, who is now 81, was the man responsible for their incredibly heavy and groundbreaking sound. Blue Cheer is often cited by music historians as one of the very first true heavy metal bands, and when you listen to their music, you immediately understand why. Their most famous recording is a cover of the classic rockabilly song, Summertime Blues, but they did not play it like the original. They transformed it into a monstrous, rumbling beast of a song that sounded like an earthquake. Lee Stevens' guitar sound was thick, fuzzy, and distorted beyond anything people had ever heard before. It was said that they played so loudly they could actually feel the air in the room vibrate. They were so loud that they helped pioneer the use of massive walls of Marshall amplifiers, a look that would become an essential part of the heavy metal uniform for almost every band that followed. Lee Stevens was a true pioneer of heavy guitar tone. Lee Stevens' band was loud enough to shake buildings. At the same time, another band from England was creating iconic heavy riffs that would be played by every kid learning guitar, thanks to the genius of our next artist. 12. Ray Davies. You really got me going with this next one. He is the brilliant songwriter and leader of the Kinks, Mr. Ray Davies. At 81 years old, Ray is one of the most celebrated and clever songwriters in British history. But early in his career, he wrote a song that would change the course of guitar playing forever. In 1964, the Kinks released You Really Got Me, and its guitar riff was like an alien invasion on the pop radio of the time. It was a short, powerful, and aggressive burst of energy built on what are now famously known as power chords. That simple, driving two-chord riff is a direct ancestor of all heavy metal. The story behind the sound is legendary. The band's fuzzy, distorted guitar tone was created by Ray's brother Dave, who grew so frustrated with his small amplifier that he took a razor blade and sliced the speaker cone. This desperate act of creative destruction resulted in a groundbreaking, gritty sound. Ray Davies took that sound and built an unforgettable and aggressive pop masterpiece around it. He proved that a simple, powerful guitar riff could be the main star of a song, an idea that is at the very heart of heavy metal music. Ray Davies wrote one of the first killer riffs. Our next legend is the man who made riffing an art form, a human riff, whose simple, powerful guitar lines became the backbone of the greatest rock and roll band in the world. 13. Keith Richards. If rock and roll has a soul, it probably looks and sounds a lot like Keith Richards. The legendary guitarist of the Rolling Stones, often called the human riff, is also 81 years old and remains the epitome of rock and roll cool. While other guitarists were focused on playing lightning-fast solos, Keith's genius was in creating simple, powerful, and unforgettable guitar riffs that became the backbone of the band's biggest songs. He understood the power of a great riff better than almost anyone. Think about the opening notes of I Can't Get No Satisfaction or the swaggering groove of Jumpin' Jack Flash. These are not just parts of a song, they are the song. Keith's style was deeply rooted in the blues, but he supercharged it with a raw, distorted tone and a rebellious attitude. He wasn't just playing music, he was channeling an energy. This focus on the riff over everything else is a core principle of heavy metal. Many music historians argue that while bands like Led Zeppelin built the cathedral of metal, Keith Richards and the Stones laid the gritty, bluesy foundation it was all built on. Keith Richards is the master of the riff. Our next legend took that idea of the riff and combined it with a voice of incredible power and range, becoming the singer for a truly legendary heavy band. 14. Ian Gillan. There are great singers, and then there is Ian Gillan. At 80 years old, he is the iconic voice of the legendary hard rock band Deep Purple. When people talk about the classic heavy metal scream, they are very often thinking of Ian Gillan. His ability to hit incredibly high notes with both power and crystal clear control is the stuff of legend. If you want to hear what he is capable of, just listen to the song Child in Time. His vocal performance on that track goes from a soft, haunting whisper to a full-blown, paint-peeling scream that will send shivers down your spine. But he was never just a screamer. He had a bluesy, soulful voice that could handle rock and roll anthems like the classic Smoke on the Water and the driving Highway Star. He helped lead the band that formed one-third of the Holy Trinity of early British heavy metal, alongside Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. His soaring voice, combined with the band's powerful organ and groundbreaking guitar sound, created a brand of heavy rock that was both immensely powerful and musically sophisticated. He is, without a doubt, one of the most important and influential singers in the entire history of the genre. Ian Gillan's voice could shatter glass. But a singer is only as good as the band behind him, and our next artist was his partner in Deep Purple, laying down the inventive and unforgettable bass lines. 15. Roger Glover. Every great band needs a great bass player to hold it all together, and for Deep Purple during their classic years, that man was Roger Glover. Also turning 80 years old in 2025, Roger was the calm, steady force in a band full of fiery personalities and musical geniuses. His bass playing was the perfect complement to the band's complex sound. It was melodic, powerful, and always locked in perfectly with the drums. He and drummer Ian Pace formed one of the tightest and most respected rhythm sections in all of rock music. Roger was not just a great player, he was also a key songwriter and producer for the band. He had a hand in writing many of their most famous songs, including that monster riff from Smoke on the Water. The story behind that riff is that Roger and the band worked out the simple but unforgettable pattern together, accidentally creating the most recognizable guitar riff in the world. After leaving Deep Purple for a time, he became a very successful record producer, working with other famous hard rock and metal bands like Rainbow, Judas Priest, and Nazareth. His musical intelligence and solid playing were a huge part of what made Deep Purple so special. Roger Glover helped write the most famous riff ever, but the guitarist who actually played that riff was a mysterious and brilliant musician who became a legend in his own right, and he is up next. 16. Ritchie Blackmore. Enter the man in black, the mysterious and brilliant guitarist, Ritchie Blackmore. Also celebrating his 80th birthday in 2025, Ritchie was the original guitar hero for Deep Purple. He was a true virtuoso, a player with incredible speed, technical precision, and boundless creativity. He masterfully blended classical music influences with hard-rocking blues to create a style that was completely and utterly his own. His guitar solos were epic, theatrical journeys full of lightning-fast runs, dramatic pauses, and jaw-dropping skill. Ritchie was famously known for being a very serious and often difficult person to work with, but no one could ever argue with his immense talent. He was a perfectionist who constantly pushed himself and his bandmates to be the absolute best they could be. After leaving Deep Purple, he formed his own band called Rainbow, which featured the amazing singer Ronnie James Dio. Rainbow continued to create some of the best and most influential fantasy-themed heavy metal of the 1970s. Ritchie Blackmore's influence on heavy metal guitarists is impossible to measure. Thousands of players have tried to copy his style, but there is only one Ritchie. Ritchie Blackmore was a guitar genius with a dark edge. But another guitar player from that same era was also a genius, known for his brilliant songwriting and for turning his guitar into a windmill on stage. 17. Pete Townshend. Our next rock and roll giant is the main songwriter, guitarist, and big idea man for The Who, the incredible Pete Townshend. At 80 years old, Pete is a true artist who used rock and roll as his personal canvas. He wrote some of the most iconic songs of his generation, including the teenage anthem My Generation and the incredible rock operas Tommy and Quadrophenia. He was one of the first people in rock to see that an album could be more than just a collection of singles. It could tell a single, complex story from beginning to end. On stage, Pete Townshend was a whirlwind of pure energy. He was famous for his windmill move, where he would swing his arm in a big, dramatic circle before crashing down on his guitar strings with explosive force. He was also one of the pioneers of smashing guitars on stage, an act of rock and roll rebellion that became legendary. He was always pushing the limits of volume and sound, and he was one of the first to popularize the use of Marshall stacks, creating a literal wall of sound that was incredibly powerful. His use of feedback and ringing power chords was a huge influence on both punk rock and heavy metal. Pete Townshend turned rock into theater. At the same time, another British guitar player was being called God by his fans, and his influence on heavy music is just as massive. 18. Eric Clapton. They used to write "Clapton is God" on walls all over London. That is how much people respected the groundbreaking guitar playing of Eric Clapton, who is now 80 years old. Before he became a famous solo artist, Eric Clapton was a member of a band called Cream. And Cream was a band that created some of the heaviest and most powerful music of the 1960s. They were a power trio with just a guitarist, a bass player, and a drummer. This stripped-down format allowed all three musicians to stretch out and play long, loud, improvised solos. Cream's music was essentially a supercharged, high-volume version of the blues. Songs like "Sunshine of Your Love" have a thick, heavy, and sludgy guitar riff that is pure proto-metal. Eric Clapton's guitar solos were absolutely legendary. He played with a fire and a passion that was breathtaking to witness. He helped popularize the woman tone, a smooth singing guitar sound he achieved by turning certain knobs on his Gibson guitar and Marshall amplifier. Cream, along with the Jimi Hendrix Experience, showed the world just how powerful and loud a three-piece rock band could be, paving the way for countless heavy bands to come. Eric Clapton was called a god for his guitar playing. Our next legend might just be the godfather of a whole different kind of heavy music, a man who has never been afraid to follow his own wild and noisy path. 19. Neil Young. He is a rock and roll chameleon, a gentle folk singer, a country rocker, and yes, a heavy metal pioneer. He is the one and only Neil Young. At 80 years old, Neil Young has done it all and has always done it his way. But it is his work with his on-again, off-again backing band Crazy Horse that earns him a solid spot on this list. When Neil Young plugs in his famous black guitar, a modified 1953 Gibson Les Paul nicknamed Old Black, and turns the volume all the way up, he creates a raw, distorted, and beautifully messy sound that has been a huge influence on alternative rock, grunge, and even some forms of metal. Songs like Cinnamon Girl and Hey Hey My, Into the Black are filled with heavy, powerful, and simple guitar riffs and wild, chaotic solos. Neil's guitar playing is not about being fast or technically perfect like some other players. It is all about raw emotion and pure feeling. He plays with a passion that is unmistakable and cannot be copied. Many people call him the godfather of grunge because his heavy, fuzzy sound was a direct inspiration for 90s bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam. He has always done things his own way, never caring about trends or what is popular. Neil Young's honest noise inspired a generation of rockers to be themselves. Our final artist also got his start in a band full of guitar heroes, proving that the 1960s was the ultimate training ground for the rock gods who would soon rule the world. 20. Chris Dreja. We end our journey back where we started in some ways with the legendary band, the Yardbirds. Our final rock and roll survivor is Chris Dreja, the rhythm guitarist for that incredible and hugely influential group. At 80 years old, Chris was right there in the middle of a musical revolution, playing alongside Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page. While those three future legends were playing the flashy, groundbreaking solos, Chris was the rock-solid foundation, holding down the rhythm and making the songs groove with his steady playing. Being the rhythm guitarist in a band with such amazing lead players is a tough and often thankless job, but Chris Dreja was absolutely essential to their sound. He provided the solid chord structures and the rhythmic pulse that allowed the lead guitarists to fly and explore new sonic territory. After his time in the Yardbirds, he actually stepped away from the spotlight and became a very talented and successful photographer, showing that his creativity went far beyond music. But his place in rock history is secure. He was part of a band that was a crucial stepping stone to heavy metal, a band that experimented with sound and forever changed what a rock and roll band could do. He is a true unsung hero of the heavy rock revolution.